back. All right. Hey, elephant in the room. How many people were messed up because the chairs were different? Yeah. You're okay. It's safe. You can mark yourself safe on social media. It's all right. We just moved the chairs a little bit. It's no big deal. Hey, I'm glad you're here today. We are finishing up. We're finishing up our series called Won't You Be My Neighbor, which we completely ripped off from Mr. Rogers. And it's actually, the movie was good and the series has been good and all of that kind of stuff. But what we have found as we've gone through this series is that for a lot of us, the idea of loving our neighbors, which Jesus talked about, if you're a follower of Jesus, you know that, is a little bit tough, because for a lot of us, we don't know our neighbors, and it's hard to love somebody that you don't know. And so what we try to do through the series is kind of give you some ideas and some ways to think about your neighbors that would maybe help you develop a relationship with them. We're not trying to manipulate anybody. This isn't a campaign or anything like that. It's just a desire to actually know my neighbors so that I can love my neighbors. And so we talked about, if you remember way back to the beginning, we talked about the idea that humility and hospitality really goes a long way to open up the possibility even of having a relationship. And then kindness and generosity and using whatever influence you have to really push towards getting somebody from a stranger to an acquaintance, and maybe even from an acquaintance to a relationship. And that's kind of where we've been at and what we've been trying to do throughout this series. And today we're finishing it up, and I couldn't think of a better way to finish it up than to tell you two stories about two different neighbors and two notes that got left, all right? And so the first one, I admit I have a weird sense of humor, but I thought the first one was pretty funny. It was from Nick, and we'll show you the note in just a second. But Nick was kind of a young adult living in an apartment complex, and he noticed something had changed with his neighbors. And so he wasn't sure what was going on, and he started kind of paying a little bit more attention, and he realized he didn't see them coming or going from the apartment anymore. And so because things had changed, because he wasn't seeing him, he wasn't sure, so he left him a note, and I think we've got a copy of it. He put a sticky note right under their peephole, and it said, "Hey, did you guys move? Your Wi-Fi isn't working anymore. I hope cross that out. I hope you're okay. Hugs and kisses, Nick," right? He's the sticky note neighbor. I've been the sticky note neighbor, right? Your weeds, my stuff, your things, your Wi-Fi, whatever, kind of, can you help? He was a sticky note neighbor. There was another neighbor that got a note, and her name was Randa. And Randa had lived in this community for not very long, maybe a couple of years, and unfortunately, she got a note too. And her note was not funny at all, actually, and her note said, because her front yard was not in great shape, "Your front yard is an eyesore. You need to do better if you're going to live here. Signed, your neighbors." And that was kind of crushing, to be honest. And if she would admit the front yard didn't look great, but in the past month, her husband had lost his job and had gone in kind of pretty deep depression over losing his job. And now he had time to take care of the yard, he just didn't have the energy to do it. But even if that was all it was, that they could have figured it out. But her 3-year-old son was battling stage 4 cancer and was in a life and death fight for his life. And so as she processed the note and everything that was going on in her life, her first response was probably not a good one, and so she waited, and she decided, I'm going to post on our community online bulletin board. I'm going to let people know what's going on. And so she very kindly posted a note and just simply said, "Listen, here's what's happening in our family. Unfortunately, my husband lost his job, and he's having a real hard time with that. And my son is struggling for his life. His health condition is so severe. To be honest, the front yard really just wasn't a priority. But I'm sorry, we will do better. I promise. Please be patient with us." I was like, that's a pretty gracious response. But what happened next was what was amazing to me. You see, before the day was over, neighbors showed up with trash bags and rakes and lawnmowers and hedge clippers, and they made her front yard and her backyard look pristine. In the meantime, a few other neighbors contacted a friend that owned a landscaping business who agreed to take care of her yard for 6 months for no charge. And the rest of the neighbors pitched in some cash to buy some grocery store cards so that they could get groceries without having to worry about the financial impact. And I call them the rake neighbors, right? Because I think for all of us, maybe we've been or we've thought about being the sticky note neighbor, but we really want to be the rake neighbor, don't we? I mean, that's the best version of ourselves. We think of ourselves that way, that I want to be, even if I'm not all the time, I want to be the rake neighbor. I don't want to be the sticky note neighbor. And I think that's true whether you're a follower of Jesus or not. Whether you go to church and church is a big part of your life or it's not hardly any part of your life, we all just want to be that kind of neighbor. I want to be the rake neighbor. That's what's going on inside of us. Now, if you happen to be a follower of Jesus, it goes a little further because you know, hopefully you know, and you've heard that Jesus said it was important for us to love our neighbors, that's a command that he actually gave us. But the truth is, even though you want to be a good neighbor, and if you're a follower of Jesus, you have the command to be a good neighbor, there may be one other reason that's even more compelling than that. Maybe the most compelling reason to love your neighbor is how well one of your neighbors has loved you. And when you hear that, if you're like me, you start thinking through all your neighbors. You're like, well, I don't think none of my neighbors love me, not like that. I mean, nobody's ever raked my yard or given me free stuff. I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by that. And so I think it's better to let Jesus explain. So if you've got a Bible, we're going to be in Luke chapter 10. Because in Luke chapter 10, Jesus has told a story. And if you were here, you might know this. But even if you're not, I can catch you up very, very quickly. He had been teaching. And he had been teaching for quite a while. And he was winding up, and you know this, you know when somebody's getting done, right? They're getting ready to leave, and somebody wants to leave the conversation or whatever. I mean, things are wrapping up. And this guy, he's the guy that reminds the teacher that we have a test tomorrow, right? You know, we didn't get to take our pop quiz. I mean, it's that guy. And he kind of raises his hand as everybody's leaving, and he throws out this question. He says, hey, Jesus, good job today. How do I get eternal life? You know, real softball question, right? You know, and he kind of just asks him this question. And Jesus kind of knows this guy's got an agenda. He's after something. And so instead of answering his question, Jesus looks at the guy, and he's an expert in the law. He's called a lawyer, and he's not the kind of lawyer that goes to the courtroom. He was, in the Jewish world, a lawyer that really studied God's word very carefully and tried to explain it to other people. And he says, well, you're the expert. How do you read it? What do you think is the answer to your question? And he says this famous response that Jesus has said, that other people have said, that probably sounds familiar to you, even if you don't go to church. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus kind of gives him the thumbs up emoji, right? He's like, you got it, go and do that. And the guy just wasn't done. He just wasn't done. And the way Luke writes it, he said he was trying to justify himself. So there was something about the way he acted or the words he used or whatever. And he asked kind of a duh question. So who's my neighbor? Which I think to us sounds like a really dumb question. Well, it's the people that live next to you. Those are your neighbors. You know, what do you mean? Who is my neighbor? But Jesus still doesn't answer the question. He actually tells him a story instead. It's a famous story. Even if you don't go to church, you've probably heard of it. I mean, we name hospitals after this story. And he gives him an indirect answer by telling him this story. And that's what we're going to look at. So if you've got your Bibles, we're in Luke chapter 10, verse 30. Or if you like to follow along on the app, it's right there for you. He says this, neighbor, he goes, who is my neighbor? And in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes. They beat him. They went away, leaving him half dead. Now, just pause here for a second. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing because everybody then that heard this story knew exactly what was going on. For us, it's kind of like he's traveling down a road and he gets beat up. I mean, what's going on? What's the deal here? Well, first of all, when it says road, this road from Jerusalem to Jericho is not a road like we think of. It's more like a hiking trail. And so if you think of this Jericho-Jerusalem road, think about the mountain park next door, right? It's rocks and it's hills and it's up and down and it's not an easy walk by any means. And on top of that, it's 17 miles. This is one of those, you don't want to travel at night because you don't have street lights. So you get up at the crack of dawn, you go as soon as it's light enough to see, and you hope to get there before it gets dark. This is a long day, a hard journey. And if you can imagine, just looking at that is actually a scene from the Jerusalem-Jericho road. You can imagine people that were outlaws, that were outcasts, that were having troubles, they would go and camp and live off the road. And when people came by, they were kind of easy pickings. They would take their clothes, they would take their money, if they had a donkey or if they had some bags, whatever it might be, that's how they made their living, by stealing from other people. And it was just a tough area. And so as soon as Jesus said that Jerusalem to Jericho road, what everybody heard was, that's a bad way to go. Like, it'd be for us, that's a bad part of town. I mean, you don't want to get stuck there. You don't want to, because bad things can happen to you. So they knew right away, this is a bad start. And he says, so this guy was traveling down this road and he got attacked, which all of them are like, yeah, you can't do that by yourself. That's what happens. Whatever he had, a donkey, bags, clothes, whatever. And he got beat so bad, which again, I know this is out of our context. We don't think about this. And I hope you've never been beat up like this. He got beat so bad that all he could do was lay there. I mean, sometimes people get in a fight, something happens, you get punched in the jaw or hit in the head or something like that. But you get back up and you kind of crawl away even or you move away. This guy was beat so bad, all he could do was lay there. I mean, the text says he's half dead. Implication being if nothing happens, he'll be all dead pretty soon. He was whipped. He was beaten badly. And everybody that's hearing the story is going, yeah, that's what happens. Again, I know it sounds strange to our ears. This sounded very common to them. You go by yourself, you go on that road, that's what happens. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. And he continues. Look at verse 31. It says, a priest happened to be going down the same road. And when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. And as soon as the crowd heard that, they probably half smiled. Yeah, that's what priests and Levites are good for. They're good for leaving you when you need help. I mean, there was something in them that they kind of felt like that rings true. The super religious people, the religious leaders, yeah, that's what they're like. They'll actually just go to the other side of the road so that they don't have to deal with you. See, for a lot of them, they had experienced these guys in a negative context. They heard the religious people talking about how they should give their money and sacrifice and pay the temple tax, and yet they never did, and they always seemed to be doing really well financially. They had heard the religious leaders tell them how bad they were, how they were always falling short, how they didn't do it right, how they needed to make up for their bad choices and their bad life, and yet at the same time, they kind of had this holier-than-thou attitude. And if that wasn't bad enough, they always used the God hammer, right? They always kind of told them, look, if you don't do what we say, God's going to get you. I mean, that was kind of the approach. And so when these guys turn out to be the bad guys in the story, everybody's kind of satisfied. They're like, exactly. That's exactly what those guys are like. That's what they do. And then they're waiting for the hero. Right? Because, just pause a second. That's a pretty terrible story, right? If the story is this guy gets beat up, he's half dead, priest and a Levite walk by him, don't do anything, and he dies. I mean, that's a bad story. So they know that, it's okay to laugh too, by the way. They know that the hero part is coming. They know that somebody's coming, something's going to happen. And I think, I can't prove this, but I think what they're thinking is, I hope the hero is somebody like us. A regular person. Like some guy that's just doing the best he can. Some guy that maybe he doesn't have a lot going on. Maybe he's not wealthy. Maybe he's not one of the elite, but he's just a regular guy. And I hope the hero of the story is just a regular guy that comes by and helps this guy out. That would be really cool. Somebody like me. But it turns out the hero is actually a very unexpected person. Look at verse 33. But a Samaritan, stop right there. I know I told you to look. As soon as they heard that word, you have to understand the tension in the crowd went from 0 to 100. The Samaritan. And here's what they're thinking. Oh my goodness, he's going to go finish off the traveler. That's what Samaritans do. Or maybe he was one of the robbers and he's going back to see if there's anything left. Because Samaritans are terrible people. They're liars, they're thieves, they're cheaters, they're religious half-breeds. They're the wrong people. That's nobody we want to be around. That's nobody we want to deal with. As soon as they heard Jesus say, when a Samaritan, that's exactly what flashed through their minds. Like, this is getting worse for this poor man. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, he came to where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went over to him. He bandaged his wounds, pouring oil and wine. And then he put the man on his own donkey. And he brought him to the inn. And he took care of him. And then the next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. He said, look after him. And when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense that you may have. The Samaritan is the wrong guy. He should have been the bad guy. Is the hero. And if you look at everything he did, it's kind of like, my goodness. It'd be one thing to help the guy, but he just went so far above and beyond. It says he saw him. he went over to him because remember, the guy's beaten up so badly, he can't go anywhere on his own. So he stopped what he was doing. He got off his donkey when he saw the guy, and he went over to him. And as soon as he got there, he saw this guy's in bad shape. He starts doing first aid. He does what he can to help him. And it dawns on him, he's not going anywhere even though we've bandaged him up. He puts him on his donkey, the donkey that he was going to ride, the thing that was going to make his trip easier, safer, and faster. He put the guy on it, and he chooses to walk. And not only does he get him somewhere safe that he could have never gotten to on his own, he pays the price for him to stay there out of his own pocket. I mean, he uses his own money to make this happen. And not only does he do that, he tells the innkeeper, hey, on my word, you can charge this against me. It's my reputation. I will be back. If there's any extra cost, I'll pay it, and I'm coming back for him. We're not done yet. I mean, everything he does is so incredible. And now Jesus is finally ready to talk to the guy that asked the question in the first place. He still doesn't answer the question, but in verse 36, he says this: which of these three do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Jesus told him, go do likewise. And when I hear that story, and when I think about the crowd and what everybody was thinking and feeling, and I try to put myself into that, it's what makes it easier for me to love my neighbor. And I know you hear that and you're like, what? Wait, how does that work? What are you talking about? Why would you say that? You see, and maybe you see yourself the same way too. When I think about this story and I think about the different people in it, it's pretty easy for me to put myself into it. I'm the half-dead traveler. That's who I am in the story. I'm the guy that's not going to get where he wants to go by himself. I'm the guy that if left alone, if no hero comes along, I'm going to be stuck. Literally or figuratively, I'm going to die where I'm at. And see, I just want to suggest this because maybe you feel this way and maybe you don't. But there's a good chance that you're the same guy. Because for a lot of us, and it could be dramatic, right? It could be a raging addiction that has taken over your life, that has brought you to a place you don't want to be and that you can't get away from it on your own. And you feel stuck. And you know that if somebody doesn't come and help and change and heal, then I am literally going to die here. For some of you, maybe it's not that dramatic. Maybe you look at your life and you look at your relationships and you realize, you know what? My relationship with my parents aren't that great. My relationship with my kids isn't that great. My relationship with my spouse isn't that great. My relationship with my friends aren't that great. And the more you think about it, the more you realize, you know what? There's only one common thing in all of these relationships, and it's me. Maybe I'm just bad at relationships. I mean, I've tried to fix it. I've tried to do it different. I've tried to make things better, but I always end up, it seems like, broken. Relationships broken. And I need somebody. I need something to come and help and heal and bring some change. Or maybe it's completely undramatic. It's the quiet desperation that comes with just being so busy and so overworked with your job and so run-frazzled with your kids and so active and so focused on trying to get stuff done and get to the next thing and do the next thing that somehow in the middle of all the activity, life has lost most of its meaning and purpose. And while it doesn't happen very often because usually you're so tired and so exhausted that when you do lay down, you fall asleep. But those rare moments when you're so busy and you lay down and you go to bed and you're looking up at the ceiling and you're going, is this it? Is this what it's supposed to be about? Is this what my life is supposed to look like? Because right now, all I'm doing is running. And honestly, it doesn't seem like anything important is happening. But one way or another, pretty much everybody ends up on the road, stuck, waiting for an unexpected hero to come along. And he does. And he does. And it's a guy you didn't expect. And he comes riding on a donkey. And he sees you. And he has compassion for you. And he comes over to where you are because you can't get to where he is. And he takes care of you. And he heals you. And he helps you get to the place that you always wanted to be, that you were never going to get to on your own. And he pays the price out of his own pocket so that you can be there. And he promises that he is coming back for you. You see, Jesus is the ultimate neighbor. That's exactly what he's done for me. And it's exactly what he's done for you. And when you think about, why do I love my neighbor beyond wanting to be the rake neighbor, beyond having the command, what is it that drives me to want to love my neighbor? It's because you have been loved so well by your neighbor. You see, we've hinted at this all throughout the series. We've kind of dropped pieces here and there as we've talked about it. But the reality is, the only way that we can really ever love our neighbors is if we allow Jesus to heal us and love us and change us, that we can then love our neighbors. And if I could, I just want to take a time out, just really, really quick. Because I want to talk to you. If you're not a follower of Jesus, I want to talk to you for just a second, and I'm not going to embarrass you. But I want you to understand something. As you think about your life and where it is, no matter how good it is or bad it is right now in this season, as you think about where you are, you need to understand that Jesus sees you. And he sees you with eyes of concern, not eyes of condemnation. And Jesus is willing to come over to you because he knows you can't get to where he is. And when he does, he's coming with compassion, not criticism. He's not coming to tell you about how bad you are and how much you've messed up. He so desperately wants to help heal you. And he wants you to live the life you were created to live, not the life you've had to settle for. And he promises, you say, but you don't know, I've messed up, I've got problems. I mean, things that I've done, the things that have been done to me. And he says, you know what, I will cover that. Through my death on the cross, I will cover the sins that have blocked you away from me. I'll pay for it. And I'm going to stay with you. And I'm going to come back for you. And so if you're not a follower of Jesus, I don't know how to put it any better or any plainer than Jesus himself did. This is an invitation. It's great to love your neighbors, but you can't do it until you know Jesus. And Jesus is asking you to receive what he's done for you and believe in who he is. And that may be the step you need to take today more than anything else, is to realize that he is loving you towards himself. And he has something better for you than what you've had. Maybe that's a step that you need to take today. But for the rest of us that are followers of Jesus, there's such a beautiful model that's here. And it's so plain that it's easy to miss almost. It's too simple. It's too easy. It's simple to overlook it and think that's like it's got to be more complicated than that. But when it comes to loving your neighbors, he's so straightforward. He's so straightforward. The first thing we have to do is to see them, right? We have to see them. And it blows my mind when I read that story that the Levite, the priest, and the Samaritan, they all saw the same thing, right? They all saw a guy over here. But for the Levite and the priest, what they saw was a problem, a project, an issue. I don't have time for that. That's none of my business. That's nothing I can be involved in. I got to step away from that. I'm sorry. I mean, it sounds like you're in a bad shape, but I got to go on. But the Samaritan saw a person. And when he came over, he didn't, don't you know better than to travel by yourself? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? How come you did? You shouldn't bring valuables with you. You know, he didn't do any of that. He saw a person that was struggling. He saw a person that needed some help. And so I love that. And it makes me think of the other story with Randa. And I know this is easy to look back. Hindsight's 20/20, right? But why didn't anybody notice? Her husband lost his job. I mean, so for a month, he had been getting up and getting out in the car and going to work and coming home and going to work and coming home and going to work and coming home, and nobody noticed that he wasn't going to work and coming home anymore. And maybe you can kind of excuse that and say, well, maybe he was working from home. I don't know, whatever. Surely at some point, you see the 3-year-old being carried out, hooked up to tubes and bottles and IVs and all the medical stuff and all the trips to the doctor. At some point, you notice something's wrong. Something's wrong. Nobody saw. And I know exactly why, because I'm guilty of it. So many times, what's running through my head is the agenda of all the things I've got to do, the places I want to go, the stuff I've got to get accomplished today, that it's easy, if I'm not careful, to be so caught up in the busyness that I don't see people. I see problems. I see projects, for somebody else. But I don't necessarily see people. And this is the most important part of this whole process when it comes to loving our neighbors. The hardest thing and the most important thing is to actually see them. Who are they? What's going on in their life? And that leads us right into the second thing. I mean, you can't go any further until you see them, but as soon as you do see them, the second thing is to consider them. And I'll be honest with you, I thought about saying to have compassion for them, but compassion is such a loaded word, and a lot of times we associate with that, well, I have to feel a certain way, or if I have to have a kind of emotion, or I have to have kind of a different view of life than other people do. It's actually better to just think of it as consider them. What's going on in their life? When I see them, how are they feeling? Am I willing to feel along with them? And this can be good and bad, right? I mean, it can be good. Like somebody's graduating, somebody had a birthday, somebody had a baby, somebody's getting married. I mean, those are exciting things. Am I willing to see that and see them and then feel along with them, celebrate with them? And at the same time, am I willing to see when things aren't going well, when they're struggling, when there's some pain and problems? Am I willing to feel along with them? I see you. I see what's happening. And I'm willing to feel along with you. I understand that's hard. I understand that's frustrating. I understand that's exciting. I understand that this is what you've been working for. But I'm willing to consider you. I see you, and I'm willing to consider you. And then the third one, which really, it almost is just a natural thing, is to respond to them. Because once you've seen them and once you've felt along with them, this part's not that hard. It's just, okay, well, what's the response? What would I want somebody to do for me? If that's what was going on in my life and that's how I was feeling, how would I like people to respond to me? That's just the simple, easy thing to do is respond. Sometimes it's being a friend. Sometimes it's making a phone call. Sometimes it's come on over, we're barbecuing. I'll help you with that project. I'll rake for you. I'll do whatever. Send them a note, not a sticky note, but, a note. Oh, come on. Man, you guys are making me work hard. I appreciate that. Send them a note. Do something to respond to them. Because I see you. I'm feeling along with you. And I'm going to do something about it. Because that's what Jesus did. That's what the Samaritan did. And when I realize how well I'm loved by my neighbor, it enables me to love my neighbors. But let's deal straight here. The standard of the Samaritan and the standard of Jesus is really high, isn't it? I mean, they went way above and beyond. I mean, am I supposed to do that? Today, and I know this, it almost never happens, but let's say we walk out of here today and we come across somebody that's got a bloody head and laying on the road or something. It's like, what am I supposed to do? I mean, for most of us, hopefully we would stop. Hopefully we would call the police or the paramedics or something, and then, we'd turn it over to them and we'd walk away. But they went so much further. Is that what we're supposed to do? Is that the expectation? You see, the truth is, I don't think I can live up to that. I don't think I can. Maybe once in a while, but all the time with every person, there's no way I can do that. So what exactly does it mean to be a good neighbor? And I think there's two things. I'm going to wrap up. I think there's two things that speak into that. The first is that God tells us in Romans that if we're a follower of Jesus, that he has poured his Spirit out into our hearts. He has poured his love into our hearts. So it's not me white knuckling it, making myself do it whether I want to or not. It's God has changed me, and that is helping me to love other people because he has loved me so well. So I got that going for me, and that helps because I can't do it on my own. But the other part of the answer are the people that are sitting next to you. God put us together as a spiritual family, as a church family. He doesn't expect you to do it all on your own. He's put a church family around you to be a resource, to be a help, to engage along with you. It's not your job to love every person way beyond what's reasonable. It is your job to be part of a church family that loves their neighbors and loves their community incredibly well. And you know what happens along the way? Because I've seen this happen in the last 6 or 8 weeks in my life. It's so easy for us to get into ruts, right? We get into a rut of busyness because there's just a lot going on. We get in a rut of frustration. And I don't know if you ever had those seasons where it seems like nothing's working, and every time you turn around, something else is broken and something else isn't working. And whether it's relationships or physical things you own or stuff at work or whatever, it's just frustrating. And sometimes we even get into ruts of pain. This hurts. It's not getting any better. That makes it hurt even more. And then I begin to think I'm going to hurt all the time. And then I've got depression on top of the pain. And we get into these ruts. And it happens, and it's not because you're a bad person or anybody, it happens. But what's incredible, when we take on this idea of loving our neighbors, it has a way of breaking us out of those ruts. Because we start out that I'm going to try to love somebody else. I'm going to be for someone else. I'm going to invest in somebody else. And before we know it, what happens is we change along the way. Because before, where our busyness and our frustration and our pain had kept bringing us back to us, when we start thinking about our neighbors, what it does is it gives us a sense of meaning and purpose and actually anticipation. And the question isn't so much anymore of what do I need, what am I going to get, and how am I going to fix this? The question then becomes, how do I love well? And what happens when I do? And now that I have purpose, now that I have people that I can love, that because God's poured out his love in my heart, I mean, I've got a church family that's going to stand with me, the world changes. It's a 2,000-year-old answer, but it's a really, really good answer. And I really can't say it any better than Jesus did. Go and do likewise. Who's my neighbor? How do you love your neighbor? Go and do likewise. Now, and I promise I'm finished. We want to help you. We do. Because this is a huge paradigm-changing kind of idea that we've been talking about over these last 6 weeks. And we asked you initially, we said, hey, get one of these 4x4 cards. The idea was simply, can you get the names of 4 neighbors, put them on a card, and start praying for them? Can you at least go that far? And for many of you, you've already done that. For some of you, kind of like, I don't know, I'm still thinking about that. I don't know if I want to do that. It sounds like a lot of work. I don't have time, whatever. Or maybe today, you're ready to do that. We got cards in the back. We got cards to Connect Center. Grab one. But I want to give you a little bit of a hack, okay? This is a Mountain Ridge Church hack, all right? If you will go to blesseveryhome.com, you know what they will do? They will ask you to put in your address, and they will give you a list of the 20 closest neighbors, their name and their house numbers, and it'll show it on a little map for you. It's public record. It's not creepy. It's not illegal. It's nothing like that. It's just a list. Here's who's bought these homes and lives in these homes. And not only that, to me, the best part is, and you can set this up however you want, but 5 days a week, I get an email, and it lists 4 or 5 of my neighbors, and it tells me how to pray for them. So as I look at that, I see their names, which helps me start to see them. And I'm prompted to pray for them. Not complain about them, not wonder why they this, that, or the other, or ignore them or anything else, but to actually, how can I pray for them? And then the next day I get a list with 4 or 5 more of my neighbors and suggestions on how to pray for them. And so I can't encourage you enough. If you're just even thinking about it, maybe the step for you today is just to go to blesseveryhome.com and start engaging with your neighbors. Because here's what I know about you. You want to be a rake neighbor. You don't want to be a sticky note neighbor. This is a great way to start that process. Let's pray together, and then we're going to continue to worship.